Star Trek Nemesis just about marked the death of the franchise. Indeed, the fact that it was a worldwide box office disaster meant that many felt the series had simply run out of steam. For the first time in many years, there was no active big screen franchise for Star Trek, and the shows were simply not running on TV anymore, with the often neglected Star Trek Enterprise going off the air in 2005. It really seemed at the time that space operas were out of vogue, with the rise of superhero movies taking Hollywood by storm, with not only the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies making bank and the Christopher Nolan movies doing well, but also a little company called Marvel Studios decided to start making their own movies, beginning with Iron Man.
Yeah, I can fly.
But what about Star Trek?
So unnecessary.
For a while, Paramount wouldn't have been able to produce a Star Trek movie, even if they wanted to, with the company's owner, Viacom, splitting from the CBS Corporation, which owned all of Paramount's TV properties, including Star Trek. Yet the franchise still had some pretty big fans, chief among them J.J. Abrams. He just directed Mission Impossible 3 for the studio, and while the film misfired at the box office, many thought he was going to be the next big-time director, maybe the next Spielberg. And Paramount was eager to keep him under their umbrella. He was principally a Star Wars fan, but he was eager to try his hand at a space epic, and it helped that two of his chief creative collaborators, Roberto Rossi and Damon Lindelof, were huge Trekkies. Certainly, though, Abrams wasn't going to direct another Star Trek Next Generation movie.
Yeah, tell me something I don't know.
It also wasn't going to be some mid-budget production for the studio, who at the time only allowed smaller budgets to the Trek films due to their limited popularity overseas. When the studio acquired the rights to produce a film from CBS and Abrams was brought on board, the decision was made to make this an A-level tentpole movie. The studio hoped that it would begin a big franchise for them.
I sure hope you know what you're doing, Captain.
So do I.
But what would it be about? Abrams said that he considered the franchise at its heart to be about Kirk and Spock, so the decision was made to revisit an old-school idea, which was to make a movie set at Starfleet Academy and about the young Kirk and Spock. Originally, they were scared off by the fact that Shatner and Nimoy would have had very little involvement. In the intervening years, however, Kirk had been killed off in Star Trek Generations, but Spock was alive. The idea was hatched to bring in Nimoy's Spock and somehow reset the timeline, so that these Star Trek movies would operate independently of the rest of the franchise. Ironically, Nimoy had once written a book called I'm Not Spock and insisted that his character be killed off in Star Trek II, only to return to the franchise, and he ended up playing his characters longer than anybody else.
Look, I don't know you.
I am Spock.
Bullshit.
So, this set up a new timeline in Star Trek that years later would be referred to as the Kelvin timeline.
Your father was captain of a starship for 12 minutes.
He saved 800 lives, including your mother's and yours.
I dare you to do better.
Orci and Kurtzman would write the script, which would center around Spock trying to save Romulus from destruction by using a highly unstable red matter that fails and sends him and the Romulan villain Nero back in time, but 25 years apart. When Nero emerges, he attacks the Federation ship, the Kelvin, and in the scuffle, the captain is killed, leading to George Kirk becoming captain for only a few moments before sacrificing himself to save his wife Amanda, who gives birth to a son, James Tiberius Kirk.
Let's name him after your dad. Let's call him Jim.
Thus, the timeline is altered, with Kirk growing up fatherless and more rebellious than he was in another timeline. He eventually joins Starfleet Academy, where he's befriended by Bones McCoy and winds up on board the Enterprise during a mission.
I'm going to give you a mild sedative.
Oh, I wish I didn't know you.
Don't be such an infant.
How long is it supposed to be?
Unbelievable.
He eventually meets a young Spock who he initially hates, but eventually also meets the older maroon Spock played by Nimoy, and he realizes that he has to step up, accept his destiny, and become the heroic Captain Kirk the universe needs him to be. Although I never bought the fact that a cadet could actually become captain, even though they try to explain it in the movie, just never really worked for me, but alas.
By Starfleet Order 28455, you are hereby directed to report to Admiral Pike, USS Enterprise, for duty as his relief.
One thing worth noting now is that despite the cast seeming pretty star-studded now in 2023, mostly everyone was unknown at the time this was made. Chris Pine had basically just played love interests in Princess Diaries sequel and a Lindsay Lohan movie, so he was virtually unknown. He beat out Chris Pratt and the nearly cast Timothy Olyphant to play the role, and his performance immediately established him as an A-list leading man. As Spock, Zachary Quinto was seen as a no-brainer, as he was best known for the villain Sylar on Heroes, and everyone had already noted his similarity to Leonard Nimoy.
Spock, in this case, do yourself a favor. Put aside logic. Do what feels right.
Carl Urban was also seen as a bit of a no-brainer, as he looked a lot like DeForest Kelley and was a rising star at the time with roles in the feature version of Doom and the Lord of the Rings series.
Good God, man.
What? Ah! What the hell's this?
Reaction to the vaccine, damn it.
As Sulu, John Cho was probably the best known of the core cast, but mostly for playing the MILF guy in American Pie and Harold in the Harold and Kumar films.
We're so high right now. We're not low.
The late Anton Yelchin was cast as Chekhov, while Zoe Saldana, who had already shot Avatar by this point, although the film hadn't actually come out, played Uhura. Perhaps the biggest coup, other than getting Nimoy back, was casting noted Trekkie Simon Pegg as Scotty, while Eric Bana would play the villain Nero, and he was by far the biggest star in the cast. Notably, the film also cast a very young Chris Hemsworth as Kirk's father, George, and despite him only having about 5 minutes of screen time, many believe it was this showcase role that landed him the role of Thor in the MCU.
Sweetheart, can you hear me? I love you so much. I love you.
Boasting a hefty $150 million budget, Star Trek holds up pretty well 14 years later. Again, I don't like the fact that they made Kirk captain, but, you know, they try to explain it in the best way they can. I guess they just felt that they needed to make a movie where there was Captain Kirk, but it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me that this cadet, who, you know, is in so much trouble with the Academy all the time, would become captain as the film went on. It still remains J.J. Abrams' best film and foreshadows his work in the Star Wars movies. It's loaded with action and is impeccably cast, with Michael Giacchino providing a soaring soundtrack, yet it has a few problems that keep it from the level of Star Trek 2, 4, or 6. Namely, in an effort to be action-packed, the film lacks character development. Indeed, none of the 3 Kelvin Universe movies would give us enough of a focus on the core Trek characters, the trio of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, whose chemistry is hard to evoke in 2 hours. I also was never really sold on the fact that Spock and Uhura would be like making out on the bridge. I mean, Spock is supposed to be so repressed, right? It doesn't really make sense to me that him and Uhura would be hooking up. Still, it's an exciting film that won over many non-Trek fans.
I like this ship.
You know, it's exciting.
Notably, it was a solid hit, although whether or not it actually turned a profit is up in the air. It was a bona fide blockbuster in North America, earning $257 million, making it by far the biggest Trek movie ever. But it only made an underwhelming $127 million overseas, which was a lot more than any other Trek movie, but also limited its chance to recoup its hefty budget. Nevertheless, the success was seen as a step in the right direction, especially given how positive word of mouth was. The studio believed that the franchise had room to grow in the same way that the Nolan Batman movies did, because let's not forget, Batman Begins wasn't a huge movie when it originally came out. So the studio greenlit a very, very divisive sequel, but that's a story for another day.
Maneuvering thrusters, Mr. Sulu.
Thrusters on standby.
Take us out.
Aye, aye, Captain.